Here's something I genuinely did not expect to witness in 2026. A Canadian Prime Minister standing on a global platform, staring straight into the cameras, speaking to the entire world, and effectively telling the most powerful individual on the planet to step back. Not with rage, not with threats, but with something far more unsettling: calm, deliberate resistance. And then it happened. The response was instant, harsh, relentless, unlike anything we've seen before. But there's a detail almost no one is discussing: it worked. I've spent years covering North American politics, and what I'm about to walk you through upends everything we assumed about leverage, pressure, and what actually happens when intimidation collides with institutional strength. Mark Carney took office as Canada's Prime Minister in March 2025. Before politics, he led the Bank of Canada, then the Bank of England. This isn't a lifelong politician. This is someone shaped by decades of managing economic collapse, financial instability, and global market shocks. Someone who understands pressure and, more importantly, how to diffuse it. Within days of assuming office, he stepped into a scenario most leaders would view as politically fatal. Trump was already floating tariff threats, already joking about Canada becoming the 51st state, already using language meant to demean, destabilize, and extract fast concessions. Most governments would have rushed to negotiate, softened positions, offered compromises just to stop the bleeding. Carney did the reverse. But here's where it gets nuanced. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't resistance for resistance' sake. What Carney grasped, and what many leaders miss, is that intimidation only succeeds when its target is unready. When institutions are weak, when pressure exposes cracks. Canada had spent months reinforcing those foundations, long before the threats went public, before tensions escalated, before anyone was watching. Trade partners were diversified, infrastructure was reinforced, supply chains secured, regulations updated, institutional resilience became the priority. So when pressure arrived, Canada didn't flinch, it didn't scramble, it didn't trade sovereignty for time, it stayed put. And this is why it matters beyond Canada. Why governments worldwide are now dissecting every step Carney took. Why this became a textbook case in modern economic statecraft. Because intimidation is a weapon, and for years it worked. Countries adjusted policies, accepted unfavorable terms, chose short-term peace over long-term leverage. But intimidation relies on one thing above all else: fear. Carney removed it. Here's what shocked everyone. Despite tariff threats, despite public confrontations, despite sustained pressure, Canada maintained its trade framework with the United States. Markets remained functional, investment didn't flee, supply chains held. The predicted collapse never came, not because Canada surrendered, but because intimidation alone wasn't enough. And it gets worse for Trump. The strategy didn't just protect Canada, it altered how other nations evaluated their own choices. If Canada could absorb this pressure without folding, what did that mean for everyone else facing similar tactics? Quietly, behind the scenes, officials from multiple governments reached out to Canada. No press releases, no formal summits, just discreet questions. How did you prepare? How did you preserve access without giving up control? How did you remain stable under constant pressure? This is the part that kept me awake, because what followed wasn't just about tariffs or trade disputes, it was about trust. For decades, the U.S.-Canada relationship ran on assumption, automatic cooperation, mutual reliance. Trust treated as permanent, not something that needed protection. Trump dismantled that, gradually, through unpredictability, threats, and treating alliances as temporary transactions. Once that trust cracked, everything shifted. Canada stopped assuming goodwill, started operating on calculation, preparation, institutional strength. That's not fragility, that's maturity. But that still wasn't the real moment. January 20th, 2026, Davos, Switzerland, the World Economic Forum. Carney walked on stage knowing exactly what he was about to do, knowing every word would be parsed, quoted, and weaponized. He opened in French, intentional, symbolic, then switched to English. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. 7 words. Silence filled the room. He never said Trump's name. He didn't need to. Everyone understood the reference. Great powers, he said, were turning economic integration into weapons, tariffs into leverage, financial systems into coercive tools, supply chains into pressure points. This wasn't criticism, it was diagnosis, a breakdown of modern economic warfare. Then came the line no one expected. Middle powers must act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. The room erupted, standing ovation, rare at Davos, especially for something that wasn't a speech, but a declaration. Within hours, Trump's team was scrambling. The narrative had flipped. What was meant to be a display of American dominance became a discussion about resistance. Trump responded predictably: personal insults, public humiliation. "Canada exists because of the United States," he said. "Remember that, Mark." Then came the revocation. Carney had been invited to a so-called Board of Peace focused on Gaza. After Davos, the invitation vanished, publicly withdrawn to send a signal. But the signal misfired. Instead of isolation, Carney gained stature, not just domestically, internationally. Leaders uncomfortable with Trump's approach now had cover, proof that firmness didn't equal disaster. And then it spread. European officials began echoing Carney's language: strategic autonomy, middle powers, variable geometry. These weren't slogans, they became policy frameworks. Within weeks, governments accelerated plans to reduce dependency on the U.S., not abandonment, mitigation, options, leverage, exactly what Carney outlined. Trump escalated. He threatened 100% tariffs if Canada deepened trade with China. Context matters. Canada hadn't signed a sweeping deal, only a narrow agreement on electric vehicles and agriculture to resolve lingering disputes. Trump framed it as betrayal, as choosing China over America. "Governor Carney," he said, not Prime Minister, a deliberate slight. Carney's response was precise. "We have no intention of pursuing a free trade agreement with China or any non-market economy. We addressed specific issues from recent years. No escalation, no retreat." The China agreement wasn't about Beijing. It was about options, about proving Canada wasn't boxed in. And here's what few noticed. Trump's attacks boosted Carney domestically. Polling surged after every confrontation. Canadians saw dignity, sovereignty defended, calm under pressure, strategic judo, using force against its source. But the real insight came later. This wasn't leader versus leader. It was institutions versus personality. Trump thrives on chaos, on emotional reactions, on destabilizing opponents. Carney denied him all of it by removing ego from the equation. When threats came, Canada didn't shout back. It activated systems, negotiators engaged, legal teams reviewed treaties, economists modeled impacts. The response was methodical, institutional, unemotional. Documents later showed Carney's team had rehearsed these scenarios months in advance, not because they predicted specifics, but because they understood the pattern: pressure, escalation, demands. They prepared for all of it. This wasn't crisis management. It was a new leadership model. Strength through readiness, power through institutions, stability as strategy. And it worked. The old assumption that size equals leverage cracked. Canada didn't overpower the U.S., it outstabilized it. Investor confidence in Canada-U.S. trade actually increased during the turmoil. Markets chose predictability, rules, reliability. Canada became the safer bet. Trump's campaign backfired. Supply chains diversified away from U.S. dependence. Allies pursued autonomy. Institutions explored alternatives. America's reputation took damage. Canada's improved. And now, the USMCA review looms. Canada enters stronger, not militarily, not economically, but strategically. Credibility matters. What Carney built wasn't defiance. It was a template. Medium-sized democracies are already adopting it, preparing early, diversifying dependencies, coordinating before pressure arrives. This is leadership in the 21st century. Not volume, not threats, but competence. Trump shouted, Carney prepared. And when chaos came, Canada stood. So here's my real question. Does this change how you think about power, about preparation versus dominance, about institutions versus individuals? Am I overstating this, or are we watching a genuine shift unfold? Let me know what you think comes next.